Okay. So as we're getting started and waiting for other people to join in, I'm going to just share a couple of things with you. I wanted to share the announcement sheet that or the link to our announcements, everything that we have going on at Choose Recovery Services. We have a lot of exciting things happening. We have some upcoming intensives for men and women. I believe our next one is a men's intensive in January. And then we have another women's intensive, and then we have a couples intensive coming up as well. That one's going to be in Arizona. I'm excited about that because that's where I'm at. So lots of good things happening at Choose Recovery Services. There's links to the podcasts that are associated with it, the Choose to Be with Amy and Alana, Choosing to Stay with Stephanie and I, and then Luke Gordon has his own Beyond the Facade podcast. So lots of good resources. There's links to groups, and you can read over the bios of all of our coaches if you're looking for individual or group support. So check out the link that I just put in the chat for the announcements. And just a couple of housekeeping items. If we welcome your questions, and even though we are going to be talking about a topic Morgan's going to introduce here in just a minute, you're welcome to ask questions related to anything else that is on your mind tonight. So you're going to see me put that little message in the chat. I'm going to just throw that in there when I see new people have joined in case they missed the announcement. But you're welcome to ask questions. If you look along the bottom, there is a box that says Q&A. And if you open up that Q&A box, you can type your questions in there. And that helps Morgan and I be able to kind of organize and make sure we don't miss anything. It keeps them sort of in an order so that we see them when they come in and we don't miss them. So like I said, you're welcome to ask questions related to anything on your mind. I don't profess to have all the answers, and I'm pretty sure Morgan probably doesn't either, but we can give you some insight, or we can point you in the right direction if we don't have any answers for you or any thoughts for you. So feel free to ask whatever's coming up for you. And yeah, should we jump in? I'm excited to have Morgan as my first guest on this webinar this month. So Morgan, I'm going to just turn the time to you and let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, so I am another coach with Choose Recovery Services, and let's see, I'm like, where do I even start? I have been coaching for a couple years now, been with Choose for about a year. Like most of the coaches, all of the coaches that work with Choose have walked my own journey of betrayal. Kind of different. I have a unique perspective as a betrayed child instead of the betrayed partner, but still have a lot of knowledge and information and passion for working with all members of the family system that have experienced betrayal trauma. So whether it's a child, a couple, the betrayed partner, I love really just strengthening families. It's kind of my passion. To kind of go along with that, I am also in school to be a marriage and family therapist. And so I am excited to start my internships in January for that here in Arizona. And yeah, really just anything, if you need to know anything about me, is that I love working with families, and it's like what I'm passionate. I plan to spend my career really helping and supporting however I can, and have a special soft spot in my heart for betrayal trauma. And I'm really excited to be here and to talk with you tonight. So that'll be great.
Thanks, Morgan. I'm going to just throw the link to your bio in the chat. So if anybody wants to read more about you, there's a quick link that you can do that. And then Morgan, I'm going to let you introduce the topic. Just as a reminder to all of our participants, you can ask questions related to this topic that we're going to talk about. And we'll probably go, I don't know, maybe half the time, and then we'll leave questions for your time for Q&A. But you can ask questions related to our topic of the night or anything that is on your heart or on your mind tonight. And so you don't have to stick with what we're talking about, but we want to share some recovery type principles with you each month that hopefully you can get some value for no matter where you're at in this healing journey. So Morgan, why don't you share with everyone where we're going to go tonight?
Yeah, awesome. So our topic tonight, we were kind of talking beforehand, like, where do we want to go? What do we want to talk about? And we are excited to talk about being able to grow individually in order to strengthen your relationship, and kind of this idea that even though each partner's experience is different, right? One partner feels betrayed, one partner has done the acting out, that both sides have space to grow, and there's work for both people. We were having a conversation last week about how somebody was the betrayed partner that Hallie was working with was like, what do you mean I have to do my own work? Like, they're the one who acted out. How come I have to do work? And she's like, yeah, well, it's, both people get to walk this journey, and there's healing and growth that both people can experience. And so even if you're the one that is in pain and is hurting, there are things that you can do to help strengthen yourself to be able to kind of stand on your own 2 feet and experience the healing that you individually need, as well as within the context of a couple of relationships. So there's kind of two sides of healing. There's your individual work and your relational work. And so tonight we're going to talk more about kind of the individual piece and what that looks like.
Yeah, there's this concept of fault versus responsibility. And even though it's not your fault that you're in this pain, if you're the betrayed partner, it is still your responsibility to do the work to heal, because as much as we would like for, I'm sure most individuals that I've talked to that are the ones that have acted out wish they could just do something to heal their partner, to make the pain go away, to ease all of that. And unfortunately, that's not how it works. And I know a lot of betrayed partners that I work with too are like, I wish you could just make this go away or put some magic salve over my heart to heal everything. And unfortunately, that isn't how this works. And so there is a lot that even though it's not your fault, there is some responsibility and ownership that we have to take to do the work to heal. And, I validate any frustration around that as well. And you kind of insinuated to it, Morgan, but I think that's one of the positive things that can come from walking this painful journey, is that both of you can have a lot of individual healing and growth, and not just possible, but quite frankly, you need to, if you're in this situation. And in order to create a different type of relationship going forward, we need to look at how we contribute to the relationship individually, and how we show up and how that impacts the relationship. And I always kind of cringe whenever I say that, because I don't want anybody to ever think that as a betrayed partner, if there's unhealthy things, that that was the reason why your spouse acted out, because that's not what I'm saying at all. Not at all. I just want to be very clear with that. That's not what I'm saying. And I've never worked with a couple where there wasn't some unhealthy patterns or unhealthy dynamics that both individuals needed to look at as we look at rebuilding a relationship after betrayal. So I just have to always be clear that even though there's unhealthy dynamics in every relationship, that isn't the reason why the acting out happened. And hopefully both of you are aware of that. If either of you have a challenge with that, I would definitely encourage you to talk to your individual support person and work through some feelings or mindsets around that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so where do you think we should start, Morgan?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking of maybe taking it from like either perspective and looking at, okay, so where do you start with individual work, either as the betrayed partner or as the acting out partner, and just kind of what that looks like. Something that came to my mind was really starting like from ground zero, really starting to work with like some emotional regulation. I think that's a really big part of healing for both partners. I know that's something that a lot of times too, people are like, yeah, that really wasn't something I did, or we didn't talk about emotions. I wasn't like in tune with my emotion. Like, I don't really know how to name them or deal with them. Like, that's a lot of people that's not something that they did previously. And so that's something that might be introduced as you're working with your support person is, okay, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of big emotions that come with betrayal on either side. Probably things that you maybe haven't felt before or haven't felt as intensely as you're experiencing them now that betrayal is in your story. And so learning how to kind of recognize that and like notice what's coming up in your body, being able to really name the emotions, and then having some like techniques that help you regulate and calm back down, I think is a good place to start for both partners, to really kind of change your relationship or change the way you experience emotion, knowing that it's going to be different. Like a lot of times people are like, well, I just want things to go back to the way they were. And this is one of those areas that I don't think you're ever going to go back to the way it was, but you're going to grow and become, different and hopefully better and more experienced with emotional regulation. And so it's kind of a broad way to introduce it, but I think emotional regulation is kind of a good place to start for either partner doing this individual work.
Yeah, when you're talking about that too, the word that keeps coming to my mind is like safety. We initially, when like right after discovery or disclosure has happened, there's usually a lot of strong emotions. There's a lot of things happening for both parties, both spouses. And so we have to look at like, what do we need for safety? And if there is emotional abuse or psychological abuse, or I mean, physical for sure, if there's any of that, then we may need to look at like a bigger, if there's physical safety issues going on or any sort of abuse going on, we might need to look at like getting some space so that we actually have the capacity to look at regulating our emotions. Because when you're in that highly volatile type of relationship, it's so hard when you're both dysregulated to regulate, because there's a lot that we kind of feed off each other's emotions. So if one of you is activated, it's not uncommon for the other one to get activated. And so if that's the case and there's a lot of volatility happening, and if there's either emotional, psychological abuse or any sort of physical abuse, then I would say let's start by working on that regulation, emotional regulation, by getting some space. And that might mean space for an hour. That might mean space for a night. That might mean space across the house in a different room. That might mean across town at a friend's house or a family member's house. And that might, it might mean for an extended period of time. So I think we have to look at like, what do we need so that we can regulate our emotions so we can actually think clearly. Because when our emotions are driving the bus, we're not really making value-based decisions. We're making emotional decisions. And that's not really the place where we want to be making choices that are going to impact today, tomorrow, our relationships, if there's children involved, impacting the family. And so safety, getting to a place of safety so that we can then start work on regulating our emotions is, I think, a big piece of that emotional regulation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that this piece of emotional regulation, like you said, it is almost like you said, if that safety is in place, it's hard to feel like, oh, I am in tune with and in control of and can regulate my emotions, because I'm still stuck in this place of danger, right? Like when I think about emotional regulation, I think of like the physiological responses that we have when we experience intense emotions. So my heart's racing, like my palms are sweaty, I have a headache, like my body aches, like all these ways that our emotions may manifest in our body, that if we are in a place that's not safe, if there is an actual threat, our body is going to be in that fight, flight, or freeze response, telling us, hey, there's something wrong here. And so if you are, like you said, in a space that's unsafe, it's going to be really hard to regulate and come down from the emotion. Because sometimes with trauma, like our bodies get stuck feeling like we're unsafe, even if like physically we are safe. That's something that's very characteristic of someone who's experienced trauma. And so, like you said, we have to make sure that physically we are safe so that we can teach and retrain our bodies to say, oh, there's not a threat, it's okay, I can come down. And how do I deal with that? And how do I kind of cope with, whatever's coming up? So I love that you brought that up. That's such an important kind of precursor to emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could spend an hour on this topic.
I know, same.
Okay, so if we're thinking about individual work and we start with like getting to a safe space so we can actually think clearly and start to regulate our emotions. I'm thinking about the couples who are in the early stages of this, and it's like so hard to know what to do because nobody ever really asks for this type of experience. And if you're like most couples, you don't know that this whole world of like support around infidelity, sex addiction, pornography addiction, betrayal trauma even exists until you're thrown into it. And so just knowing like what the next steps to do can be like challenging. Like you don't really know where to even start. And so that's why I'm glad you're all here, regardless of how long you've been on the journey. Um, the resources you can find with Choose, and there's lots of other good support resources out there, is a good place to start of figuring out what is my next best thing or what's right for me. And this is where that individual work, it can, I describe it as almost kind of uncomfortable for a lot of couples. Maybe not for everyone. This probably isn't true for everyone, but for a lot of couples where they're in some of their old patterns that even if they're unhealthy, they are comfortable because it's what we've been used to. And you hear the word codependent a lot in the therapy world, and I kind of despise the word codependent. I don't like it because it seems to kind of insinuate that there's something wrong with you if you have a codependent pattern. And I actually think about codependent patterns or behaviors as like safety behaviors that we've picked up along the way to keep ourselves safe or to protect ourselves from some sort of pain. Usually we've picked it up from childhood or previous relationships or previous life experience. And so a lot of times you come into the relationship with those. And so I don't like the word codependent, but it's what is used a lot. But I think about the tearing apart of that, like stepping out of the codependent patterns or the unhealthy patterns. Like we've been kind of linked together with them in an unhealthy way. And as we start to have more awareness around what those patterns or behaviors are, and we start to try to step out of them, it can actually be uncomfortable, even though it's healthy. It's kind of scary because it's different. And usually when one person is stepping out of them, it the other person may not like it because it's new, that you're not staying in the same cycles over and over again. You're stepping out of the cycle. And so it can be really uncomfortable and scary. So if that's where you are, it doesn't mean you're not doing it. You're not doing it. You're not doing the right thing by stepping out of the unhealthy patterns. It just means that sometimes you have to go through that discomfort in the middle of stepping out of it in order to get to more of an independent place where you can do your individual work and your individual healing so that when you step back into the relationship, you're not intertwining so much anymore, but you're stepping back in an interdependent way where you're there for each other, you're supporting each other, and you're allowing each other to do your own work. You're allowing some autonomy, some individualization, and so it's a different type of support, and again can be uncomfortable, but also really healthy at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, as you were saying that, I was thinking of as when we just started talking about like, okay, if this is, you're at square one, what do I do? Kind of looking at this like I mentioned earlier, if I were just entering into this space, I would have an individual coach to do individual work or therapist and couples. Like each partner should have their individual support person and a relational support person. And I think that what you just described kind of explains that or like makes that idea make sense that we need to like the separation, stepping away from our old patterns, our old habits is that like finding safety for ourselves. Like, hey, if it's not healthy, if the patterns that we're in aren't serving us or serving our relationship, there needs to be that separation. Let's go each work on ourselves and try to, work on are part of the codependent pattern. So if you're, for example, like a lot of women may feel like, oh, I have to, keep my husband happy, right? That's my role. What that might look like would be kind of stepping away and being like, okay, I'm actually not in charge of making my husband happy all the time, right? I don't have to have dinner on the table when he gets home in case he comes home and is in a bad mood, right? Like I can kind of control my own self, and he gets to control his own self as well. And so having that separation of like, okay, I'm gonna start breaking patterns. And then for that example too, like the husband comes home, oh, it's actually not my wife's responsibility to make sure that house is clean and dinner's on the table when I get home, right? That no matter what I come home to, I'm in charge of the way I show up and respond. And so it's that like separation, beginning to work on your own part of the picture, so that, like you said, when you reunify and when you start couples work, because sometimes people are like, oh my goodness, we need to jump right into couples work first. And sometimes that may be helpful and effective, but sometimes it's like, actually, gotta back up a second. Like, let's go do some individual work first. Go work with your own coach or therapist for a couple months. Then let's try couples work again. When you guys both have this level of like starting to create better safety for yourself and for each other, you're maybe starting to undo some of the codependent patterns and starting to learn what it looks like to be in this healthy interdependent relationship, then we can reunify and kind of come back together. So I think you described that so perfectly. I was thinking too, maybe we should define a little bit. We keep throwing out this term interdependence. Maybe we should define kind of what that is and maybe how that's different from codependence or independence, and just kind of like paint that picture. Do you want to start first or?
Sure. Okay, so I have an analogy that I like to use with interdependence, and actually it's more of like a personal experience. So I guess if that's okay, I'll share a personal experience with you for a minute that kind of demonstrates this. So a couple years ago, I can't remember which one of us bought, but we bought some dance lessons for something, and we went to the Fred Astaire dance studio here and took some dance lessons, and we're not really dancers in that way, like that's not our thing. Although I do love it and it's fun, but it wasn't like we didn't have a background in it. So it was like we were learning something new. And as we went the first night, we were both pretty clueless. Like they were teaching us what we should do, and they had us paired up together. And what was happening is we were trying to watch what the instructor was telling us to do, and we were trying to figure it out. And if you've ever danced, you know that you have to mirror each other. So if he is steps forward with his right foot, you have to step back with your left foot, and like you have to mirror each other. And so really what was happening was there was a lot of clumsy dancing. There was a lot of toes being stepped on. There was a lot of like bumping into each other. Him not giving the right cues, me not catching him when he did. And it wasn't, we were just really getting in each other's way a lot. Well, then what happened was the instructor could see that we were struggling. And so they came over and they put one instructor with him and one instructor with me. And they mirrored, like the instructor taught him how to give me the cues. She taught me how to follow, and I could do it with the instructor and he could do it with the instructor. So we felt what it was like. We saw somebody who was a little farther ahead of us, knew a little bit more, knew the technique, how to do it. And then we got back together, and it was still clumsy, wasn't that great. But we were getting it. And then after a few weeks of doing that, like all of a sudden everything just clicked, and we were like, oh my gosh, we're like actually doing this. And I always think of that as a comparison to this interdependence, because the bumping up against each other, stepping on each other's toes is like the codependent patterns. We're getting in each other's way. I was getting frustrated with him. He was getting frustrated with me. I was trying to tell him what to do. He was trying to tell me what to do, and none of it was working. So then we had to pull apart. Each of us work with our individual support person for a minute. We figured things out a little bit better. And then when we came back together, he knew how to give the cues. I knew how to follow him. We both knew the footwork a little bit better. And it was, I mean, we're not like professionals or anything, but it we were supporting each other, we were following each other, we were leading, we were, and so that's an analogy to me that makes sense of the interdependence. We're not getting in each other's way. And if you think about it, like if you take that up a notch, like think about ice skate dancers, and they're like throwing each other, if you think about the Olympic ice skaters. And if one of them isn't doing their part, you're actually in danger. So like the partner that is being tossed or thrown or whatever is supposed to be caught, if the one who's catching them isn't doing their job or doesn't go home and practice and doesn't do their individual work, it's not going to be as good when you get together, and it can actually be dangerous. And so had only one of us actually learned what the instructor was telling us, we would be stepping back into it together, trying to use our newfound skills, and the other one would still be stepping on our toes and not learning their part in it. So that's healthy interdependence. Does that give you a good picture? Like that's my analogy that makes a lot of sense to me of what healthy interdependence is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think either of those examples is great because there's also like two separate individual dancers that are involved, that it's like we're not just like one unit, which I think a lot of times, like especially when we get married, it's like, okay, now we're combining and we are one, and now we do everything together, and we live together, and we share the space, and it's like total this union of our lives. And a lot of times it's like that separation kind of goes away. Like you don't go to your own separate homes anymore. You don't like have your own life anymore. You don't have your own things for a lot of people. And so it's like there is so much of this coming together, and that's where it really gets messy, right? And some of those codependent patterns can start to show up if we're not super intentional about each being our own person and walking our own journey kind of side by side or like hand in hand. I've heard it described too, this idea of interdependence, kind of like a bridge. And it's like either like each partner is either side of like a suspension bridge. And in order for the bridge to be strong and structurally sound, both partners have to be strong and solid on their own foundation. And it's kind of this idea with interdependence too, that if there's only one side of a bridge, yeah, it's not a bridge. Like it's not gonna get anybody anywhere. Yeah, you can't cross the river over the bridge if there's only one side. You have to have both pieces, and they're two separate pieces on opposite sides doing their own work, holding their own load to make the bridge work, function.
Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful idea, that interdependence is this each doing our own work side by side together, walking it hand in hand, but at the same time, we're both walking it, right? It's not unbalanced one way or the other.
Yeah. I was thinking about when you were talking about the both needing their individual support person and the couple's support. I think there's sometimes a misconception early on. I think that's kind of almost the automatic go-to is like, oh my gosh, we have problems in our relationship. We need a marriage counselor. We need a marriage coach. And while I do think that that's an important part of everything, I think sometimes we think that the marriage coaching or therapy is going to be the thing that fixes the relationship or that helps the relationship heal. And I actually, when I work with couples, especially early on, we're not doing relational repair stuff in those early stages of couples work. We're doing like helping you understand what codependent patterns there are that need to be stepped out of, and how to focus on what you have control of. And we're doing more of like, let's teach some healthy communication, some healthy skills and tools. And the relational repair piece comes later, sometimes way later, when there has been recovery work done from both individuals. And organically, you're going to start to feel the positive impact on the relationship as you're both doing your individual recovery work. But the actual relational repair piece of couples work comes way later. So if you're doing couples work early on, hopefully you have someone that's supporting you, that is helping you learn healthy communication, healthy conflict resolution, and healthy boundaries, things like that. And then the relational repair piece is going to come way later after there's been safety and trust being rebuilt for an extended period of time. Because we can't really expect the relationship to repair if there hasn't been safety and trust rebuilt and there hasn't been enough time allowed for that to happen. So I think that's sometimes a misconception with couples work early on of what it is. Like, okay, the couples work is going to be the thing that helps us heal, and it's just a piece of it. And the relational repair part actually comes later.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about too, I'm such like a tangible person. I'm always like, okay, give me something to like chew on, give me something to take away. That's very much if you've ever worked with me, I like to, okay, what are you taking from this? I like actionable steps. And so I'm thinking about like, okay, if you're listening to this, you're like, okay, give me something to start, working on my interdependence. Like, what does that look like? And I think we've talked a lot about safety too, how safety is a big part of creating this interdependence and walking our own path. And I like boundaries is kind of what's coming up for me, that starting to set some boundaries for yourself. And there's a million different ways that boundaries can be helpful for your individual healing and for your relationship. But really being able to start to kind of boundary off parts of yourself and your relationship to create space for more healthy patterns to be introduced. Like when I work with people on boundaries, I think a lot of times that like I'll describe boundaries as almost like a gate or like a fence around yourself. That's like, okay, it's not that it's rigid and it's this structured rule and this has to be this or has to be that, but like it can be flexible and it can kind of move, and there's a gate that opens in and out, and you can determine what comes in and you can determine what comes out. But really what it is it's a way for you to protect yourself and protect other people from your stuff leaking out as well. So there's a lot of different analogies I'm thinking of with boundaries, but it's this idea that you're kind of starting to create that separation with boundaries. And I'll give an example, kind of going back to that emotional regulation piece that we talked about earlier, an example of maybe like an emotional boundary that we can set. Boundaries, I feel like, again, if you're early on in this process, people are like, well, what is a boundary and how do I set a boundary? And I don't say boundaries willy-nilly, but like, give me something tangible. And so here's something, if you don't take anything else away from it, hopefully you learn how to set an emotional boundary. But this is an example that I was thinking of. So we talked earlier about how there's a lot of big emotions that come up in all in all areas when betrayal has happened, both for the betrayed partner and for the acting out partner. And a way that you can set an emotional boundary to kind of keep yourself, so protect yourself from going outward to other people where it doesn't belong, is to say something like, hey, I'm noticing that I'm feeling activated and I need to go take a walk right now. Or if you're in a heated conversation, hey, I noticed that I'm really starting to get angry right now. I need to go take a break. Like I need to go take an ice bath or something to calm down. Or that may be an extreme example, but I need to go remove myself, right? So it's this idea of taking accountability for your emotions. So, hey, when I'm feeling this, I'm going to go regulate. And it can also be flipped. Hey, I'm noticing that when you get upset, I don't feel safe. When that happens, I'm going to separate, or I'm going to go, again, I'm going to go remove myself to protect myself from whatever else is outside coming in. So there's a little verbiage idea that you could use, that if you notice big emotions coming up, being able to take responsibility for them and regulate yourself so that it's not bleeding into your partner, and your partner's not responsible to fix your emotions and you're not taking on their emotions. But it's this idea that we're each responsible for our own emotional reaction, and there's things that can help you navigate when you're each having big emotions. So I don't know what you'd add on that. I know it sounds so clear cut on paper and it's a lot different in action, but
Yeah.
here's your theoretical idea, I guess.
I have a couple of words I like to think about around emotional boundaries. One of them is a containing boundary, which is what you were referring to as like keeping your unhealthy stuff in. And then a protective boundary, which is like letting other people own their own stuff, own their own unhealthy comments or contributions to difficult conversations. And so I think about that containing boundary. And when I'm working with couples, or individuals, I'm always like, mirror on yourself, because it's easy to go. And if you're in a heated conversation, it's easy to say to, let's say, if you're the wife and your husband is upset about something, and you say, well, you're being a jerk and I'm not talking to you like that. So when you calm down, we can have a conversation again. But actually, what's happening there, if you keep the mirror on yourself, is that if they're upset about something, it causes you to be uncomfortable about something. So in order to like take a constructive or a productive time out from the conversation, it really needs to be, instead of you're being a jerk, I'm not talking to you, it needs to say, you know what, I am finding myself not able to stay regulated in this conversation and I need to take a time out. I need to step away. And I always have a rule with this, because this could keep us stuck in a pattern of unhealthy like avoidance if we step away from a conversation. So you have to have like an agreement with each other where we're going to give each other permission to step away when the conversation gets escalated. And I say that we give each other permission because it's also not uncommon for one of you to be a pursuer or both of you to be a pursuer and say, don't walk away. We need to finish this conversation. Don't walk away. And actually, it's okay to give each other permission to walk away. I actually think it's more productive and more healthy to take a timeout, to take a little break. But the key is you have to have a promise to return. So you can't just walk away, and because then a lot of times that's just how you avoid it, right? If one or both of you are avoidant, then it's easy to just go, nope, not talking about it right now. And then the pattern sometimes falls into like stonewalling or just negative energy that you can feel emitting. And then usually that bubbles up to the point where it's like a shaken pop bottle. It can't be contained anymore. And then it comes out sideways and all over everybody. So couple things I like to encourage people to think about. What if you mirror on yourself? If I'm feeling uncomfortable and I'm not able to stay regulated, I'm about out of my own window of tolerance, then I'm stepping away because I'm uncomfortable, not because of what the other person is doing. And that's just more of a relational way of doing it too. It may be true that that the other person is not being healthy, or maybe they are being a jerk. That could be true. And that's not ours to own. That's theirs. That's part of the emotional. I'm going to let them own that. I'm going to focus on what I have control of. And again, if it's abusive and that's happening, then you might need a bigger space than just a little timeout in the other room for a minute. You might need a bigger space. And if that's happening, I really hope that you will consider getting some individual support, because it's really important to be able to talk through that and to know how to protect yourself in a safe way on that. But that's just a couple other thoughts I would add to that whole emotional boundary of like, okay, let's and I also, another thing I also encourage people is have that conversation where you give each other permission to take a time out or to take a break when things are in a calm place. So not in the middle, you need to like agree to it from a place of regulation so that you can both go, okay, let's look at what's happening here. When we get in those heated conversations, I'm not able to stay present. And then I end up saying things that are more hurtful. And then we have more pain to heal from on top of the pain we're already in. So let's give each other permission to like take a step away when we get escalated to that point so that we're not causing even more pain in the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one last thought, and then April has a question we'll get to in just a second. Yeah. And I totally agree with what you're saying. Like this, I love the idea of keeping a mirror on yourself, right? I tell a lot of my couples, I'm like, the word you, like that's a very finger pointing, like you were doing this and you were doing that. On the same vein though, I also think it can be helpful sometimes to be able to describe what's happening and why you're feeling the way you're feeling and what you're going to do about it. So for example, like going back to my example from earlier, when you come home and I can tell you're angry because I haven't made dinner, I feel whatever I'm feeling. I'm feeling attacked because I haven't seen you all day and you're upset with me, right? Or I'm feeling unsafe because I don't know how you're going to respond when you get into a fit of rage, right? I'm feeling whatever it is I'm feeling, so I'm going to take this break. So there may be a little there that's like, if you're using it to describe what's happening, like, okay, this behavior is what's making me feel this way, or this situation, or this scenario, this, like, putting some context to the feeling, then describing, like you said, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go journal for 20 minutes and I'll be back, or I'm going to go on a walk around the neighborhood really quick. Yeah. So I don't know if that finishes that thought, but that was just something I was thinking as you were sharing, that there is some space there to be like, okay, when we're in a heated argument, when I notice this is happening for you or for me, this is what I'm doing to protect myself because this is how I'm feeling about it. Anyways, maybe let's wrap that up, and should we look at April's question about couples repair? I don't know if you want to tackle that, or you have thought around that.
I do have thoughts around that. Do you want to start? I can, whatever. So the question is, for those of you that are listening, is how
Yeah.
much time is common for couples repair? And I wish I had a good answer. I really
Yeah.
wish there was like a 6 months answer. There actually isn't an answer that is, I would say, okay, let me just take like this isn't ideal, so ideal is not the right word, but in an ideal situation, when a couple comes in, let's say, so there's so many factors that play into it, because has there been an addiction, a sex addiction that's been going on since they were a child? Was it a one-time sexual acting out, or was it an affair that lasted a couple, like there's so many different nuances that impact this and how much time it's going to take for the relational repair. So it's really hard, but I can say what to give yourselves the best opportunity for the shortest amount of time for the relational repair to start happening is when I see two individuals who come in and they're ready to work. The one who's acted out has some humility, they're taking ownership, they're ready to change, they're ready to get the support, whatever they need to do to either set themselves free from the addiction, to step out of the unhealthy sexual acting out patterns, whatever it is, they're ready to do that work. They're ready to try to understand what their spouse is experiencing in betrayal trauma, because it's confusing for both people. The betrayed partner is all of a sudden thrown into this world that they didn't know about, and the one who's acted out has known. So if the one who's acted out can come in and they have a real desire to understand and develop some empathy for their betrayed partner, and the betrayed partner also comes in going, oh my gosh, I'm in this pain and I need some support, and you both come in really willing to do the work. I have seen couples, like I think about a few of my couples who came in that way, and I would say that a year to 18 months, they're starting to see a lot of really good progress and connection and more healthy intimacy. And that was with both of them doing consistent, like diligent, humble work. Now there's all these other contributing factors that play into how long this is going to take. If there is a sex addiction that's been happening like their whole lives, that is not something that you can just, I don't like what, I don't even know what the right term, you can't fix that. You can't step out of that in a couple of months. You don't take years of an addiction and step out of those patterns in a couple of months. So that's going to add some time to the healing process. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that there can't be some relational repair that's happening along the way as they're making effort to create safety and to step out of their unhealthy patterns. So it can happen all along the way, regardless of what your situation is, as the effort is being created. Now, on the flip side of that, if there is someone that comes to me, usually it's a betrayed partner, that will come, and the one who's acted out doesn't think they have a problem, isn't willing to do the work, or they think the betrayed partner is the problem. If they're still in that mindset and they're not coming to the table ready to do work, that slows things down. That can really slow things down and can almost prevent true relational repair and true intimacy from happening. So I know I've supported betrayed partners who choose to stay even when their spouse isn't willing to do work. and they can do some individual healing, and they can make the best of a situation that, you know, they're choosing to stay. It's, you all have a right to make the right decision for yourself. But the true intimate relational healing doesn't happen to the level that it could if someone is coming to the table really willing and ready to do the work. So the time question, man, is really kind of a loaded question that I don't have the right answer to. But I would say if you're both doing work, so if I'm, and if you have clarifying questions, feel free to throw them out there. But if you're both doing work, and I'm not sure if the question you're asking is when should we start couples? Maybe you're asking when should we start seeing a couples coach or therapist? I think that you can see a couples coach or therapist at any time. But just know that, first of all, I wouldn't encourage you to see just anyone. Make sure that they have the ABSATS training, the partner betrayal sensitivity training, because otherwise it can cause a lot of damage. And so make sure that you get someone that is trained and has a lot of experience in infidelity, betrayal, and betrayal trauma. Okay. Let me finish reading these comments. A lot of emotional immaturity as well. So I'm not sure if this is fixable, but 7 months separated, working in our own thing. He's getting frustrated because he's lonely and wants me to move back in, but I'm not ready. Okay. So 7 months in, I would say hold on a little longer. Don't get frustrated yet. And the fact that this is that uncomfortable piece. He's lonely and wants me to move back in. That's the discomfort in that separating into that healthy interdependent, like you got to go into the independent phase so that when you come back into the interdependent state, then you can do it in a healthy way. So that right there, that what you just described is like that painful piece that I was referring to, is it's not comfortable, and it doesn't mean that you can't be having some. So if you have a relational coach or therapist, they can maybe help you guys if you, I don't know if you have like a separation agreement or something where you have some structured, maybe you start doing check-ins. That's something that a lot of people do commonly, like you have a structured check-in once a week or however frequently the betrayed partner wants them, so that you can kind of gauge where each other's at. Maybe you have a once a month couples session with each other so you can kind of keep moving through things, and you know, having somebody that's like helping you guys can talk about the specific things that are coming up. So yeah, and if you're worried that you're not ready for couples sessions yet, then that's okay. You can wait until you feel a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, if you have a good coach that can kind of guide you, and maybe your coach hopefully has somebody that they work with. I love when we have couples that come to choose and they have an individual coach. They each have an individual coach and then a couples coach or a therapist within our company, because we can get the permission to like collaborate and support each other as we're helping the coupleship and the individuals. It's not always the case, but it's really nice when either I'm working with one of the individuals and they have another coach within the company that we can, you know, we can kind of collaborate with and support the couple together. So yeah, the average time I would say 7 months in is pretty early. So I totally validate the frustration and the like. I think both parties usually want the healing quickly. And 7 months is still pretty early, but if you both are doing some good work, then you'll start to see some just organic positive impacts on the relationship as you continue to do your individual work. And then when you feel ready, I always kind of let the betrayed partner gauge that. If she's ready for couples work, if she feels safe for couples work, then maybe it's time to start considering that. So hopefully that was helpful.
I just want to add one thing too that I've seen, kind of like you said. I have a client that's coming to mind who's about 8 months out from discovery, and she's like, "I'm 8 months. Like I should be doing a lot better than I am." And I kind of had to back up with her and kind of point out that 8 months is, I mean, it feels like a long time. It feels like, holy cow, I've lived 8 lifetimes in the last 8 months with everything I'm experiencing. But kind of zooming out, like you said, and looking at, okay, however long, if you've been married for 25 years and then you have this betrayal, 8 months is not gonna, it's just not enough time to substantially get the growth and the change that you're wanting and needing from your relationship. And hopefully, if this is, you're working on things together, you're laying a completely new foundation for the next 25 years of your relationship. And so, something that one of my professors in college said is, he's like, things take time. Like, if you take anything from my class, it's TTT, things take time. And still, I remember that one thing. I don't remember anything else from his class, but I remember that things take time. And I think that's true with relational and individual healing too, that, like you said, it's uncomfortable. That 8 month stretch, that 9 month stretch is hard, and being able to allow yourself the space to slow down and walk your journey and give yourself the time that you really need to heal, I think you'll like mom, like Hallie said. I slipped there. There's a little thing. My mom, Hallie's actually my mom. I was like, oh, let's see if we can not say my mom. Hallie's my mom. So, anyways, I figure I should call my little slip there. But, anyways, there's my theme. Things take time. Give yourself the space that you need to walk your journey and really get the healing that you need. And yeah.
One more add on to that question. Is there a good time for separation? This is where having a good support couples, or someone that can help you come up with a separation agreement, is helpful. I hate to put time frames on anything, because I even when I'm supporting a couple with a healing separation, I'm like, okay, if he goes and gets an apartment for 6 months, in 6 months, we're going to reevaluate where we're at. And then we're going to decide if we need to stay in the separation longer, or if we're ready to start reintegrating again. So I really hate like time frames, because things can change so quickly. So I don't think, I mean, I have clients that I've worked with that have been out of home separated for 18 months. And that was that feels really long. I'm imagining that's probably feels really long when I say that. But I'm working with the husband, and he says it was the best thing for me, because it really gave me the time and the space to do my own work, so that when I came back in, we had laid that foundation and we're doing things differently. So again, I would encourage you to just get a couples coach or therapist that can really support you on that, and check in. Let's say for 3 months, and then we're going to reevaluate. Or let's say for, whatever, sometimes it's a week at a time, but I think a good several months, 6 months, is not a bad thing to start with, and then reevaluate where you're at. So, but every situation's different. So let's look at a couple of these other questions that came in. So how common is it for the betrayer to feel like they no longer love their spouse after years of pornography addiction? He says things like, how can I love you if I keep hurting you? Okay, so the first thing that comes up to me on that is a lot of like, well, addict brain thinking is what I think of. How can I love you if I keep hurting you? It's also kind of a little of a, I hesitate to say this, but like victim mindset is like, I'm hurting you, so I'm gonna let you go. I would say they're still probably, having known nothing about this situation or this couple or individual, but that is very much common, like an addictive mindset. And so I would say they need more time working on their recovery. I mean, you can't force that. You can't change that if that's what they're saying. They might be their excuse to, they're not willing to do the work. So they're wanting an excuse to like step away, which is super painful. And man, my heart just aches just reading that question. But to me, that's more of an addict mindset than something that happens because of their pornography addiction. So I don't know, Morgan, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree. That's what I was thinking. Is I was like, I would want to know more about what his the partner with the pornography problem, what is their work looking like? Do they have level of sobriety? Are they in recovery? Because again, reading that, kind of like you said, my first suspicion is they're still acting out and they're still in the addiction based on the way he's wording that. Like, oh, I no longer love you. Why do I keep hurting you? But I also want to give some hope that it may be the addict mind, like you said, saying that right now, like, oh, I don't love you because I'm, whatever. And at the same time, if that partner is able to get some support and get some good work done with stopping their addictive tendencies, that I think they can not like come out of that, but I think there's hope that like it doesn't mean that your relationship is over right now, call it quits because he's saying this. I think looking at it from the perspective of he's still acting out, and like you said, our brains literally function differently when we're in addiction. And so if he can get some sobriety under his belt and start working recovery, his not that his feelings are going to change, but I think his true authentic self is going to show up more, not masked by the addiction saying, like you said, it almost sounds like an excuse of like, well, I just want to keep acting out, and so I'm going to say that this is what's happening so that I can separate and free you and I can do this and not feel guilty about it. But if I can work on my behaviors, then I'm being accountable and I really am showing up for you and I really do love you. And so I don't know if that gives you some hope, but that's kind of what I was thinking as well, that it does sound like addict brain, and there's hope if he can get some work, that it's not like he doesn't love you anymore.
I almost think too, as I'm thinking about it, it's more about probably a reflection of how he feels about himself. He doesn't love himself, and
Yeah.
maybe it's not even that he doesn't want to do the work, but he hasn't had the right kind of support yet that's allowed him to have some success with the work. And so then he doesn't love himself, which makes it hard to love anybody else. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of where my brain goes to. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's helpful, and my heart goes out to you on that situation. That's really painful.
Yeah.
Okay, Morgan, we're almost out of time, but we have one more question that came in. I'm going to let you tackle. I don't know if you've had it. I'll read it out loud so that those that are
Yeah.
listening. Hear it. It says, thoughts on what to tell the kids if you're considering moving from an in-house to a separate living separation. Kids are ages 11, 9, and 6. Nothing's been shared with them yet. We're 5 months in from discovery and 1 month into an in-home separation. Similar to the prior question, there is emotional immaturity, avoidance, and not able to provide consistent feelings of safety. You want to tackle that one?
Yes. I'm like, I want to meet with you for an hour and let's talk about this next week. We'll come back. Just kidding. Yeah. Oh, what to tell the kids? When I work with people on family disclosure, really kind of I give you like one guideline. You put ages in there, so still pretty young. Really look at, okay, developmentally, where are my kids? Emotionally, maturity levels, like where are they, right? Older kids, 15, 16, 17, maybe you're going to get a little bit more information about what's going on. 11, 9, and 6 are still pretty young. So they're probably don't need to know everything that's going on. This is happening and dad did this and mom did this and this is, but validating their reality, because kids are so observant, like they know what's going on. So they can say, oh, I've noticed that mom and dad aren't sleeping in the same room anymore. What's that about? So really making sure that you're not gaslighting your kids by saying, oh, everything's fine, mom and daddy, we're not anything, letting them know, hey, something is wrong and we're getting some help and we're getting some support. And the best way to do that right now is we're going to take some time apart. And that doesn't mean that we don't still love you. And this doesn't have anything to do with you, but this is what's best for us right now. And we're going through a rough patch. And here's what we're doing to work on it. So I don't know if that makes sense. And again, it's going to be very situational, especially with a separation, kind of how you go about presenting the information. And this is when you get to see this parent, and this is getting, like all the details, all the nuances there. This is where I'm like, yeah, we could talk about this one for a really long time, but I think just kind of general guidelines would be validating their reality. Hey, mom and dad aren't together right now. Yeah, that's really hard. What are you noticing about that? Kind kind of getting curious to their experience. Because I think the last thing you want to do is gaslight them and say, oh, everything's fine, mom and dad are, whatever it is. Like, give them enough of the truth so they can feel like, oh, yeah, what I'm seeing in mom and dad is true, right? We don't want them to start to then question their reality and their intuition and what their body's telling them about the situation, making sure that however much they can see can be validated. So I don't know if that I don't know if that gives you a clear guidance. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I know we're just about done, but that would be my biggest thing is validate their experience and don't gaslight what they're experiencing.
And I'm gonna just throw Morgan's bio in the chat again, because you can schedule a consultation with Morgan. This is like her arena. So she's very big into advocating for the family and for the children. And so if you have questions, would be a good opportunity to chat with Morgan about that and get some more information. And hopefully that was helpful for you. But man, my heart goes out to you too. That's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes physical separation, I know it can feel really scary. And I wish it wasn't as scary, because it can honestly give you couples sometimes the best opportunity for healing, and for healing to happen more quickly than if you stay in the home in unhealthy patterns for a longer period of time. I think that almost like ripping the Band-Aid off and moving into separate homes and situations, as painful as it is, gives you both a, more motivation to do the individual work so that you can get back together than staying together and bumping up against each other in the unhealthy pattern. So as scary as it is, and it's, I think, from supporting couples who have done a successful therapy or therapeutic separation or healing separation, can be one of the best things you can do to give yourselves the opportunity to heal. So yeah, so reach out to Morgan if you want to talk more about that. And we're out of time. I hope that those of you that attended tonight have gotten something valuable out of this. I will throw my email in the chat. If anybody, Morgan, I don't know if you want to do that. You can.
Yeah, I'll put mine as well.
If anybody wants to reach out to either of us directly, you can do that there. Our webinar will happen again next month, and I think my guest is Laura. I can't remember. I looked at it before we got on. But I think my guest is Laura Fisher, who is awesome as well, another one of the coaches at Choose. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and we hope to see you again next time. And please reach out to Morgan or I if you have any other questions or need additional support. And thanks for being here.